Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are diving straight into a mystery that is literally as old, deeply rooted, and universal as humanity itself. We're talking about the little people, the fairies, elves, and nature spirits that totally populate the edges of our folklore. These invisible or sometimes semi-visible entities have been documented across pretty much every human culture on Earth. But today, we're not just sitting around telling fairy tales, we're actually going to look at this massive cultural phenomenon through a highly analytical lens to uncover what's really going on beneath the surface of all these ancient stories.
So, do fairies really exist? Now, you might hear that question and think, oh, here we go, another basic age-old debate about belief versus skepticism. But actually, scratch that, because that is not what this explainer's about. We are totally stepping away from a simple yes or no. Instead, we're treating this as a sort of epistemological detective story. We're investigating human perception itself. Like, how is it that so many wildly different people across completely disconnected eras and continents have reported seeing and interacting with these exact same types of beings?
Okay, let's dive into this. Our analytical framework for this investigation is called the Odyssey's Prism, and we're specifically drawing from its 24th extension. The axiom here states it perfectly. The prism doesn't exist to blindly affirm the existence of fairies, and it doesn't exist to aggressively deny them either. We are treating this subject with absolute intellectual rigor. Its main function is to categorize and distinguish exactly what is happening when humans encounter the unexplained, entirely without jumping to immediate conclusions.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the enigma of the little people, move on to the prism's grid, look at Paracelsus's taxonomy, dive into the spirits of the earth, decode the alchemy of myths, and wrap it all up with a matter of perception.
All right, Section 1. The Enigma of the Little People, a universal cultural phenomenon.
Before we can really analyze the phenomenon, we have to acknowledge just how incredibly widespread these stories are. This isn't just some localized European myth born in the Middle Ages, it's a fundamental global human experience. We're talking about the yokai in Japan, the hidden Huldufolk in Scandinavia, the Encantadas deep in the Amazon, the nymphs of ancient Greece, the jinn in Islamic traditions, and of course, the mischievous lutins and leprechauns of Celtic Ireland. It really seems like humanity just has this unshakable obsession with tiny, invisible roommates. It's an undeniable anthropological fact that virtually every culture on Earth has documented these nature spirits, usually associating them with the spaces in between worlds. So the real question is, what exactly produced these parallel narratives all over the globe? Was it just a collective imagination, a psychological projection, or maybe something else entirely?
Moving on to Section 2, the Prism's Grid, 4 epistemic levels.
So the crucial point is to analyze all this global data without falling into rigid skepticism or naive belief. We need a really strict filter. The prism categorizes these supernatural encounters into 4 distinct epistemic buckets. First up, we have the cultural phenomenon. These are the established folklore exhibitions we literally just talked about. Second is valid phenomenology, which respects sincere, first-person human testimonies as totally valid data points of experience. Third is established fiction, like the famous Cottingley Fairies case from the early 20th century, which we can safely and scientifically categorize as a proven hoax. But the fourth level, that's where our investigation really lives. It's the open question. This deals with what humans actually perceive when they're in altered states of consciousness or highly specific environments. We don't dismiss it, we keep the question wide open.
Section 3. Paracelsus Taxonomy, mapping the 4 elements.
If we're going to classify these entities, we've got to turn to Paracelsus. He was a brilliant 16th century Swiss physician, alchemist, and early scientist. And he didn't just write down fairy tales, He systematically translated into Latin what popular traditions had already empirically observed about the natural elements. He mapped nature spirits directly to Aristotle's 4 classical elements. You've got the earth spirits, which he called gnomes, water spirits, known as undines, air spirits, the sylphs, and fire spirits, the salamanders. This was a highly systematic attempt to map the forces of nature way before modern physics even existed.
Section 4. Spirits of the Earth, Gnomes and Lutins under the Prism.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how the prism translates ancient myths into modern biophysics. For the sake of this explainer, let's zoom in exclusively on the earth element. Take a look at the folklore on one side, the gnome, described by Paracelsus as a subterranean being, hostile to sunlight, basically acting as the guardian of geological secrets and mineral memory. But look at the prism's translation on the other side. Through this analytical lens, specifically drawing from the theories in Extension 23, the gnome actually becomes the archetype of the passive force. It represents the physical resistance of matter itself.
It embodies the profound depth of the Earth that only yields to those who respect its inherent laws. We have literally shifted from a mythological little guardian to the actual physics of material resistance.
Let's see how this builds with another famous example: the mischievous Luton of Brittany, or the classic Irish leprechaun. In folklore, they're deeply domestic and territorial spirits, always tied to a very specific tree, rock, or ancestral house. But run that through the prism, and they translate into a territorial egregore, tapping into extension 11. What does that actually mean? Well, it means they are an articulation of the deep psychological and historical relationship between humans and their environment. It is quite literally the spirit of a place that has been condensed and shaped over generations by collective human intention and memory.
Section 5. The Alchemy of Myths, the Dwargar of Norse mythology.
Okay, this brings us to Norse mythology, which honestly offers one of the most mind-bending translations of all. In the ancient Eddas, the Norse dwarves, or Dvergar, are these divine artisans. They are the ones who forge incredible objects of power like Thor's hammer Mjolnir. But under our analytical lens, these dwarves aren't just literal little people banging on anvils in some dark cave. The prism translates them as the biosoftware of matter. They represent the transmittable, alchemical knowledge required to take raw, resistant matter and transform it into an instrument of signal and power. It is an ancient, absolutely brilliant metaphor for human, technological, and alchemical mastery passed down through generations.
And finally, Section 6, a matter of perception, the final canonical position. So, what does this all mean? After filtering this global folklore through our epistemic grid, what's the ultimate takeaway for Extension 24? The prism concludes that fairies do exist, at a minimum, as one of the longest and most universal convergences of human perception. But it outlines very specific conditions for this. First, the observer has to be in a location with a highly dense information field. Second, they must be in a state of maximal physiological and psychological receptivity. Third, the human nervous system itself has to act as a calibrated integral probe, picking up frequencies we normally just ignore. And fourth, under these precise conditions, humans consistently perceive something that standard modern instruments simply miss. It's not saying the fairy tales of little winged people are literally true, but it is proving that human perception is capturing a real, unrecognized phenomenon in the environment.
To perfectly encapsulate our entire investigation today, I want to leave you with this thought. This something deserves rigorous investigation, not rejection for lack of a framework, nor belief for lack of rigor. The prism chooses investigation. Our reality is far denser, far more complex, and a whole lot more interactive than our modern instruments currently allow us to see. So the next time you walk through an ancient forest or hear a myth about the little people, ask yourself, what is the environment actually trying to communicate, and is your own biological instrument calibrated to perceive it? Stay curious, keep questioning, and we'll see you in the next explainer.